Okay, so the other sport for week 7 is, of course, golf. And, I put them together. I think they really go together. I mean, number one, they're more individual sports, whereas, I think the team sports, um, as opposed to team sports, yeah, it takes a team of people. A golfer has a caddy and a swing coach, and I mean, just kind of stuff like that. A tennis coach and things of that nature. But really, they're fundamentally different than the team sports. They're more similar to one another, in that you have these athletes who are sort of by themselves when they're competing. There's no one else. I mean, it's all on them. You can't pass the ball to a teammate if you're tired or whatever. There's also the aspect of you know that they're a sport that that historically, if you want a proper court or a proper course, it's going to take a little bit of resources, for the type of grass that you need for a tennis court. Now, yeah, they do have public tennis courts at parks, and you can even just hit against a wall. But for tennis, if you want to really be competitive, you need to have access to courts on grass. Well, for golf, that's even more true because it takes millions of dollars to create a golf course, and so they need to recoup that money somehow, and they charge exorbitant amount fees for you to go on and golf. And I did a fair bit of golfing. It's probably the sport I played the most when I was in high school, and they would let us on for cheap. We would call up and they would tell us what time that because they wanted the trained golfers of the future. These golf courses wanted, they saw something about, hey, we'll let a kid come in for $10 or even $5. There was one golf course that, you know, one of he was actually a couple years behind me, but his dad was a member, and so he could bring 7 friends for $1 each. So 8 of us would go down there and play, and they knew what they were doing. These golf courses, they were trying to make us into golfers of the future and link us to a specific course. Okay, so there are ways that people with not a lot of money can get onto a golf course, but by and large, it's just a lot more elite. They're both so they're both a sort of a sport of the wealthy elite, the sport of the upper class. They've both been very kind of snobby about who they let in and who they don't let in. In particular in regards to class, and in particular in regards to race. And you did some reading about that as well, and particularly for golf. Not allowing black players, and fairly recently not allowing female players to be members of these clubs. Um, so much like tennis, tennis evolved from a racket, a net game. Uh, Golf evolved from a number of ball and stick games that were played throughout Europe during the medieval period, with the modern game originating in Scotland during the 15th century. But there's, sort of an example of something from, I think it's Norway, that there was a lot of sort of hitting a ball with a stick. But the game that we know today as golf started to kind of coalesce in Scotland a long time ago during the 1400s. Okay. It's a very long time ago, but the rules have changed somewhat. But you can actually draw a line back 600 years to Scotland, and a ball and stick game that is fairly similar to what is played today. It's pretty astonishing, really. Due to land ownership and course upkeep costs, golf throughout this period, this medieval period, was associated with nobility. Um, Kings and maybe some lords could play it. Okay. And today, along with tennis, one of the 2 popular American sports associated with country clubs. And you can create a sort of a jerry-rigged golf course. We used to do that. We used to go down to, my friends and I used to go down to Valley View School. Back then they just had a gate open on the weekends. You could just walk right in. Wouldn't be that way today. And so we'd go put like a cup, like an upside down cup or like a bottle or something. That was the hole. You had to actually hit it in order for and there actually was a golf course at La Sierra University, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they would make the holes with chalk and make sand traps with chalk. And if you landed in a sand trap, you added a stroke, that type of thing. But, by and large, if you really want to get good at golf, you're going to have to play it on a real course. And these real courses, like I said, tend to be associated with country clubs and wealth and, sort of in us and them mentality. And it might be difficult if you're a person of color or if you're a person without a lot of means. And certainly if you're both. Okay. So tennis and golf are kind of in that category. And it does have a checkered history with, we're going to talk next about the rigid rules and honor and this, that, and the other. But it does have a very checkered history when it comes to race relations. Due to its class backgrounds, it's associated with tradition. You get a green jacket at the Masters. You get the little brown jug from which you're supposed to drink alcohol. I think if you win the British Open. About honor, you're supposed to report. You're supposed to report and not kick your ball towards if you lose your ball, you're not supposed to take it on another one that looks just like it and put it down. It's sort of historically has been a sort of a self-reporting, I trust you, you trust me because we're gentlemen, type game. Well, of course now it's on TV, so if anything happens, everyone sees it. But there's just all these potential infractions, and it's constantly happening. There was one that happened very recently where a guy actually lost because of some minor infraction, and all the players were really angry because they thought it was just kind of a stupid rule. There's one that if the caddy takes out the pin from the hole, he's supposed to hold it and he's supposed to either go put it aside or put it back in. Well, in one case, I remember this was like 15, 20 years ago. He was starting to walk back, but it kind of, this big, long 6-foot thing, it kind of like dipped towards the hole. And the golfer was given a 2-stroke penalty because he was pointing towards the hole with the caddy's not supposed to sort of point towards the hole. Okay. So there's these kind of rigid, rules. A lot of these rules are historically, I think, designed, to be quote unquote gentlemanly to keep other people out of the game. Golf is the hardest game. You have people that excel at multiple sports that say that golf is the hardest to do because it takes strength, it takes mental acuity, it takes accuracy, it takes tremendous eye-hand coordination, also a certain calmness and a repetition. You need to always do the same stroke the same way twice. But then there's also another aspect to it is you need to be cautious and risk-taking at the same time. And you need to know in what quantities and when to privilege one over the other. It's very, very difficult. And, a lot of professional athletes play golf, because it's something to do with the downtime and you can talk. You get away from your own sport, but you're in another sport that allows you to socialize with your other buddies from that sport and you can just kind of hang out. Michael Jordan, obviously, they just had a match where Peyton Manning was on one team and Tom Brady was on another. Essentially someone who almost could have, Danny Ainge is actually the only, I believe still the only American athlete that was all pro or essentially all pro in 3 sports. He was drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays. He was drafted by the Boston Celtics. And he was essentially a scratch golfer, meaning that, he has a 0 handicap. Michael Jordan's a very good golfer. I mean, there's a lot of people that are really good golfers, but they all say it's way harder than basketball. It's way harder than football. Different specialists focus on different parts of the game. Some people are really good at driving and their short game isn't so good. Some people are good at the sort of the middle game called the irons. There's the wood, although they're made out of metal now. Long distance clubs where you try to hit the ball as far as you can, but with accuracy. And then there's the middle game, trying to set up your short game and avoid the obstacles at the same time. And then there's some people that are good at chipping and putting. The best players, however, excel or at least do well at all of these 3 aspects. Much like Tennis, there's 4 major tournaments, and they're the 4 sort of Grand Slam tournaments. Uh, there's the oldest of these, the British Open, which now calls themselves the Open, even though the U.S. Open is called the U.S. Open. I think the British are trying to assert their control over the number 2 spot as being the second most relevant. But the British Open. Have you ever seen the British Open? It's quite different than the other ones. Tends to be very windy. It's often in Scotland. There's not a lot of trees. There's often just kind of like this barren, area. A lot of sand traps and maybe a creek or two, but not a lot of trees to hit. I actually don't like the British Open for that reason. I mean, it looks like you're playing golf like out on the moors. Like you expect the Hound of the Baskervilles to come up, and there's going to be like a swamp over here. Like there's no trees, and maybe there's a few trees, and it's windy, and it just never seems like it would be that pleasant to play in the British Open. There's the U.S. Open, which goes back a very long time, 100 years as well, much like the British Open. And the U.S. Open is certainly the second most prestigious in the United States. And then there's the Masters, which is the most prestigious golf tournament in the world. It's played in this beautiful course in Georgia called Augusta National, designed by one of the best golfers of all time. But being in Augusta, Georgia, the Masters has a long and sordid history when it comes to the acceptance first of racial minorities, particularly black golfers, such as Lee Elder, and later even Tiger Woods. Even by that point, there wasn't a problem with Tiger playing. As you saw, he still had to put up with stupid comments from other golfers, about they better get the fried chicken and watermelon ready. I mean, just unbelievably racist, coming from someone who should have known better. But Fuzzy Zeller was from the South, and, that was just part of the milieu he grew up in. And so what he didn't think, what he just thought it was as a funny comment, for much of the rest of the United States, viewed it as what it was a racially insensitive and stereotypical comment. So the Masters has had their problems. I mean, the most recent one is that they never wanted to have a female member. It was the sort of the old boys club, and they still have very few female members, but it still is it's such a beautiful golf course. If you've never seen the Masters, I mean, they're playing, and they tend to play in, is it April or it's when all the rhododendrons are blooming, and it just looks like they're playing in the Garden of Eden is what it looks like. And they have the whole green jacket ceremony, which is just so interesting. It really is the greatest golf tournament in the world, although it does have this sort of exclusionary, this kind of dark side to it. And then there's the PGA Championship, which is also held in the United States. So 3 are held in the United States, and then one is held in England or Scotland. Then there's a couple of other, ones that are key, including one I'll talk about called the Ryder Cup. And actually, you saw some footage of the Ryder Cup. And then they have another one called the President's Cup. Every 2 years, they compete something called the Ryder Cup, which it used to be the year. I think at first it was the best British golfers versus the American golfers a long, long time ago. But then the British golfers, the American golfers just were so much better. We're a nation of 340 million rather than 80 million. So they added Europe to it. Now I even think it's the world versus the United States, and you have these matches against each other, and it's a lot of fun to watch. It's more patriotic, and they're playing as a team. They're not playing against each other. Golf has been long noted for its interplay with social issues, including historic exclusion of the lower class. Particularly in the lower class is allowed, but you're there to carry some other guy's clubs, so they don't have to carry their own clubs. You're there sort of as a beast of burden almost. Although modern caddies are often hired not because they can carry, but they're often people who are very good at judging distance, even better than the pros. These are like the pros who would be really good if they had a better physical skill set, or even a better hand-eye coordination. But the caddies today often, you'll see them correcting pros. A pro will say, is that about 100 yards? And they'll say 105. I think you should go with this. They're there to give advice, basically, and to try to kind of cheer them up if they're feeling, center them. Okay. But initially it was just, hey, we're gonna be philanthropic. We're gonna let some poor dude carry our clubs and then give them a few bucks, that type of thing. And recently, just in the last couple of years, there was a guy that went down to, was it like in the Yucatan? Was it Mexico? It was somewhere in Latin America, and his normal caddy was sick, and so he had to just hire a local caddy, and the guy won like $1 million and gave the guy like $5,000 or something in it. I mean, even other players were like, dude, what are you doing? The guy helped you win. You should give him, the going rate should be $50,000. And it caused a big kerfluffle. We've talked about racial and ethnic minorities and women. Golf has had a checkered history. I mean, we're talking about Lee Elder well after Jackie Robinson and Bill Russell and other stars, Jim Brown and other sports. Althea Gibson. I mean, it's embarrassing really for golf, I must say. However, Tiger Woods changes a lot of that, and I don't like Tiger Woods. Number one, he's always been a jerk. I mean, you could always tell that. He's never been a friendly person, and I was kind of done with him before all his scandal with sleeping around. But and I also he won't talk out on social issues. I remember when a guy he went to college with and who was his teammate in golf had a leg circulation problem. And so had a hard time walking 18 holes. And so, he petitioned the PGA to allow him to ride a golf cart. And, a lot of the younger players like, of course, the guy has a physical challenge. He should be allowed to ride a golf cart. And a lot of the older players were like, no, it gives him an advantage. And, this, that, and the other. And Tiger Woods remained silent and never stuck up for I think they were roommates at Stanford at one point, but, doesn't want to damage his brand by getting involved in politics. So that was really kind of unfortunate. But, as much as I don't like Tiger Woods as a person, he is so critical for American race relations in sports. And, Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. Tiger Woods didn't integrate golf, but he was just as important for golf as Jackie Robinson was, or almost as important, because he was the first superstar. And he came in and he first won at the Masters. I mean, that was important too, is that, and he won by so many strokes at the Masters, and he was like 23. He was just out of college. I mean, it really was like a wake-up call that it's a new world in golf. It's a new world generationally. These guys that work out like they're football players and golfers, they're coming along and coming out of college, and minorities are here, and not just as Lee Elder, and I can't remember the other guy's name, who are good but not on the top level. It's guys that are going to be at the top level. Okay. And golf had to change just like that. And it was a black superstar and an Asian American superstar coming into golf. Okay. Because Tiger Woods is essentially half Asian, and became, I think, the first true Asian American stratospheric superstar, on the same level as Michael Jordan and Tom Brady and, Magic Johnson and whatnot. Golf is very easy to compete against other people, even if they're better than you. You can't really sort of like, I can't play against Wilt Chamberlain and have it be, competitive, but you can in golf. And that's why golf is the sort of the amateur game that lots of people can play. Is they call it handicapping. And what it is that you find out between 0 and 32, what is your average stroke? 72 being par. If you par every hole, you'll get 72. And then, if you're 1 over par on everything, you're an 18 handicap. If, you average par on 14 holes and bogey, which is 1 over par on 4 of them, you're a 4 handicap. So I can literally play with Tiger Woods because I'll have like a 52 handicap or whatever. And, he'll have a 0 handicap, and, it's going to be nipping, we'll take his score, add 52 to it and see who wins. That's why it's one of the most widely popular of participatory amateur sports. Here's the Mount Rushmore. Bobby Jones was really the first real superstar. I mean, he was just so dominant. He won the Grand Slam, the first to win the annual, and I think still maybe the only to win the annual Grand Slam. Although at that point there were only two majors, and then he won the two major amateur tournaments. And then of course he created Augusta National. He's the one that designed Augusta National. He was the first real superstar. And then you had two guys at the same time, Arnold Palmer and the greatest golfer of all time, Jack Nicklaus, also called the Golden Bear. And the reason Jack Nicklaus was the best was that when Tiger Woods was dominating, Tiger didn't really have a lot of competition. He had Phil Mickelson, is that his name? Yeah. And he had a few other people that were good, but I mean, there wasn't sort of like a transcendent player that he had to compete against. At the beginning of his career, Jack Nicholson had to deal with Arnold Palmer, one of the greatest of all times. And Arnold Palmer is certainly not one of the four greatest golfers, I don't think, but he popularized golf to everyone. And he was so warm and friendly and kind of would do all these clinics where he'd go around and golf with people and press the flesh. And he was like a tireless promoter of golf, which is why I put him on here. But he was really darn good. He's certainly top 10 and probably top 6. But, Jack Nicholson had to deal with Arnold Palmer at the beginning of his career, and he had to deal with Gary Player and Tom Watson at the end of his career. I mean, he had probably Jack Nicklaus had to deal with 3 of the top 10 players of all time while he was winning all of his 16 champion titles. Whereas Tiger Woods didn't really have any top 10 person. The closest he had was, but still, winning 14 in golf is incredible. And that's what Tiger Woods did. And I think if it hadn't been for some knee problems and if it hadn't been for his life falling apart, he likely would have reached Jack Nicklaus, maybe even surpassed him by 1. It's still possible he may get there. I think he's only 2 behind. But as you get older, younger people coming along, and there's more of them you have to fight their way through. That being said, I believe Jack Nicklaus won one like in his late 40s, his last title. Then there's one that's probably the greatest of all time, but never gets put on any Mount Rushmore. And that's perhaps the greatest athlete in human history, Babe Didrikson Zaharias, who essentially dominated anything she ever did. She was dominant at baseball. She was dominant in track and field of various different formats, and completely dominant in golf. She was the first female sporting superstar and perhaps the best athlete of all time. She just did everything well, and but she almost kind of became a curiosity. She'd go around and do exhibitions, and that's how she got paid, because there was no pro league for her to take part in. There were really no, she would compete against men. She'd go golfing against men because there were no female golf people of note. There was no league or whatever. And occasionally there'd be a female golfer, and they'd have a match. But she would spend much of her time, they called it barnstorming, which is you just go traveling around playing different people. You book the LA County Fair, you book, Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. You just kind of become almost like a unique thing that people kind of want to stare at you, and hey, let's see the freak play, that type of thing. And that's what she was reduced to. I'd love to have seen her if she'd lived in the modern era, but she's certainly probably the best female golfer of all time, and perhaps the best athlete of all time. I'm going to show you one. Let's see. One clip, and if you want to, like I said, I think you can tell I really don't like Tiger Woods as a person, but he's just incredible as an athlete, and incredible for sort of the maturity of Jackie Robinson. Started the conversation with race and sports, and we're still having these conversations. The whole shut up and dribble thing with LeBron, tells you that we're still going to be, race and sports are going to be intertwined, for the next 50 years, but Tiger Woods led to a certain maturity of the ability to talk about sports, because it was golf, and if you want to know how good these guys are at what they do, Nike said, hey, we want to do this. We understand you have this trick shot that you do, and we want to put it on a commercial, and he's like, okay. And they're like, why don't you do a practice? He's, I don't need to do a practice. Let's do it. And they did one take, and then they printed it. They never did a second take. They didn't need to. But look at the amazing balance and the unbelievable hand-eye coordination. The only thing probably you're going to see short of hitting a 100-mile-an-hour fastball when it comes to hand-eye coordination in baseball. I mean, you can't really compare throwing a football or putting a basketball through a hoop to the hand-eye coordination with golf, where you're swinging at 100 miles an hour at something that's this big with something that's this big, and trying to get it to go exactly where you want to go. So check this out. The reason golf is so intoxicating is that once in a very long while you hit this amazing shot and it goes exactly where you want it to go, and you think to yourself, "Oh, I could be like a pros too." It's sort of like playing poker. You can't have that moment. You can't in basketball. You can't in football. You can't. You're not going to hit. You're not going to hit off of Aroldis Chapman. You're not going to get a hit off of Chapman. But you can hit a ball and it will go exactly where it was probably just luck, but you could sort of imagine yourself in those moments where you drain a 12-foot putt, that type of thing. But see, these guys are so good at what they do that he was able to switch hands, put it behind his back, have it come to rest it's not a flat club. He's holding it at an angle, but just the eye-hand coordination that it takes to do what he did in that is just absolutely incredible. And in tennis and golf are two, really skilled sports that it takes a long time, and there's so many people doing them, and most of them never, the difference between they say the difference between a 4 handicap in golf and a professional golfer is like all the world. Okay, you'll never be on the same level without that handicap, no matter what. Because you might have one good round, but they play 4 rounds in 4 days for these professional golfing matches. It's 18 holes on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday, and on Sunday. Those 4 strokes turn into 16 strokes before too long. So these are the two sports that are linked in many fundamental ways. And they're a lot of fun to play. I played both of them. I wasn't very good at tennis. I was really good at drop shots, but I just didn't have any power or speed. I couldn't get around the court very easily. This was back when I was, like a beanpole. But it just took a level of athleticism that I never really had. I also wasn't that good at golf, but, I was maybe a little bit better, and I kind of preferred golf. But they're fun because there's a lot of dialogue with your friends and opportunity between points, and as you're walking up to the next to hitting the next ball. They can be very social games, particularly golf. That's it for week 7.